Welcome, Rhett. Thanks for coming on the show today. So excited to have you on and to learn from you and from your experiences. To get started, would love to have you just introduce yourself, what you've done, and where you've been, and what you're most excited about right now.
Well, Jacob, thanks for having me on the show. That's a loaded question. Our name is Rhett Howard, um, CEO of a company called Accountability Inc. We're an advisory coaching, executive coaching business. All of us in the business are longtime founders. I've sold and started 6 companies, and we're all sort of longtime serial founders. And so entrepreneurs. So we help businesses scale. We help companies get through their culture issues. We help companies kind of see the future and how they have to change and evolve to meet that future head on. I've started a company. My first sort of dive into entrepreneurship was in 2004 with a children's toy company. And before that, I was with USAID and working in international development. I did Peace Corps and did politics. It was early in, right out of school. I got involved in some political races, and so done a lot. Done a lot of. Seems kind of like I floated around a little bit, and I think I needed to do that until I landed on becoming an entrepreneur. It took me about 30 years to get to that point. I wouldn't do anything else now.
That's awesome. Yeah, we were talking a little bit before we hit record about your political race, and I think there's a lot of things that as I've accepted that I'm also an entrepreneur. There's a lot of things that I recognize in myself and in others that it's like, yeah, well, this is just something you love and you love to be proactive and try to create value and you're willing to challenge the existing norm, and that really is
Yeah.
the aspect of life that you need to be an entrepreneur. And then you just have to be crazy enough to say, okay, well, I'm going to go try to make money and not just get a paycheck. No, that's exciting. Okay, and then you also mentioned you've written a book that's coming out soon.
Yeah, I started writing when I was in the toy company. We were an Inc. 500 company a few years in a row, and got a chance to start writing a column at Inc. magazine, and never really considered myself a writer or anything. Uh, Through that column and through I've had a column at Forbes for probably 7 or 8 years, and I write a column now for Rolling Stone. I started writing, and it became a cathartic exercise, how to think through the problems I was facing either as an entrepreneur or with a client. And it's still that today. I mean, that was probably 11 and 12 years ago. And so the result of that is 3 books. The first one was a sort of a journey through learning to be an entrepreneur. And then the second one was sort of a daily habits book. And this one is about self-talk. It's called Headamentals. It comes out in October 28th. And this was about self-talk. And it started out as a presentation I did. I did a keynote at this conference, and it evolved into this book. And I started to want to explore, because it was coming up in my coaching, about our self-talk. And we all have it. We all have the monster on this side and the maverick on this side. And, we have this internal dialogue, most of us. And, I wanted to explore that. And so, what it evolved into is a book about our team and how our self-talk affects our team. And we can go from there in terms of talking about it. But, we figured out that, and no one's really written about this. We write about culture a lot. We write about leadership. We write about those kind of things, but no one's ever connected self-talk, I don't think, to a team and how it impacts your team and their performance. And so this was a really interesting journey, and it was a really interesting discovery, and sort of go through that and to see how me as a leader, if I show up with negative self-talk, how it impacts teams, morale, performance, productivity, and that ultimately affects the bottom line. And we wonder today why we have such poor engagement in our organizations. We wonder why people are checked out and looking for that next job. We wonder why the way they talk to our customers, we wonder why they do that. We wonder why there's so much tension. Well, a lot of it, I think, comes from the way our leaders and our managers talk to themselves and where that starting point is. And I'll give you an example. I was at a client's office a couple of weeks ago, and we sat in one of their team meetings, and it happened to be one of the lowest performing teams. And they had just done an engagement survey. And what came out of that was, it said that this was a pretty low performing team. But when we sat in the meeting, the manager started the meeting by saying, we're the lowest performing team. And so she just reinforced, and she said it, and she said it with the tone that said, yeah, I guess we're just the lowest performing team, and we're, it is what it is. I mean, it just you saw everybody just sort of deflate, right? And it was it's okay to be honest about our scores, but it doesn't mean that we can't come up from this. It doesn't mean that we can't. This isn't an opportunity to change the performance, but by voicing that out and saying, "Yeah, I guess we are just who we are." The team just deflated and they're struggling. In fact, that in the last couple of weeks, they've lost a couple of members of that team, and so we got to watch what we say. We got to watch how we say it. We got to watch how we show up and the dialogue that we're having with ourselves. And that, I was, it constantly this idea kind of constantly reinforces itself in our work.
That's so interesting. I'm curious. Right early on there, you mentioned that you never consider yourself a writer. Do you introduce yourself as a writer now? Because having one column, let alone three, having one book, let alone three, eventually you're a writer, right?
I guess you are.
Well,
I have to own
I
them.
wonder,
I guess I have to own that.
yeah, I wonder, in this letting our words, like limit us and define us with
Yeah.
the just as well with that team that it's so powerful when we recognize, hey, that and we recognize and decide what fact right now do we want to let define our future.
Yeah, for sure.
And that is, yeah, that is so interesting. There's become this awareness, and maybe it's just I'm becoming more aware of it, and though I don't think it's always existed, especially in what you're seeing, that leadership and management, right? Two very different things.
Mhm.
But often in business in the past they've been conflated and said, hey, if you're a manager, you're a leader. And then it becomes great. Well, what's a great leader? And it's like, cool, well, here's all the accountability tools of a manager, and like the hammers or the things that are like, how do you keep people in line? Where now it's coming out and realizing, oh, wait, there's all these like soft, warm, and fuzzy ideas that we've thought about that like people
Right.
would have laughed you out of the room 20 years ago to say, hey, it's important that this CEO or that a manager or whoever, even an individual, they're like, hey, you're not giving heed to this negative voice in your head, and that you're proactively doing things to fight that. So I'm curious. You mentioned a little bit and gave that awesome example of how the way that a manager showed up
Mhm.
and like them accepting the negative self-talk, affected the whole team. How does in a less obvious example, like you have a CEO, is their negative self-talk always apparent when they stand up in front of the company at an all hands, or is it more like the internal battles that they're fighting?
It's a good question. I think that it can manifest itself in a lot of ways. I'll give you another example. I coached a CEO last year, and he called me one day and he said, I'm just really, really angry. And I said, okay, let's dig into that. We dug into it, and he said, I've been biting people's heads off. You know, I've been really just like and kudos to him for recognizing it and understanding that something had shifted, something had gone, was bothering him. And he's a pretty self-aware guy, and so uh, it took us about a month to really figure it out, and we figured it out because I was at the office. I was actually having a meeting with him at his office, and the his staff assistant came in, and he rolled his eyes. And so when she left, I said, what was that about? Like, what was the, and and I don't know. So we dug into it. And what we figured out was that um, that she reminded him of his mother. And he's got a, he's got issues with his mother, and the mannerisms and the way she spoke and the way she spoke to him drove him up the wall, and it was affecting the way he was, talking to everybody else. And it just he was, she would annoy him, and that's not her fault, right? She wasn't unprofessional. She was good at her job, and but it just the whatever triggers he had from childhood and from growing up, um, she brought those out, and so It's not her fault, but he had to fix it, right? But all those voices, all those emotions, all those things were showing up in a way that was a negative for him and negative for the team. And I think that's just a one example, right? Where we have a leader that's struggling with, maybe they're struggling with the, where to go with the company, how to does it launch that product, or how to, and all those things that we bring with us, all that history, all that hurt, the pain, the rejection, whatever it is, the things that impact the way we show up and the way we talk to ourselves. um it's a big club. I think I saw a figure that 6 million people, 6 billion people, have self-doubt, and they have, you know, these moments where they doubt themselves, or they doubt that they belong in that room. They doubt that they belong, right? And, um, and so that's how it shows up. It shows up in a conversation. It shows up in a way you act in a meeting. It shows up in an eye roll. It shows up in, you know, I, uh, I have a friend that, I can tell when something's going on in his brain because of the way his facial expressions, right? He hides, he doesn't say anything, but his facial expressions give away the annoyance and the frustration and everything else. Um, and people pick up on that, right? It's not always words. Sometimes it's expressions. Sometimes it's the little things that we think we're containing ourselves. We think we're, not saying anything negative, but we are, because of the way we come across. So, um, and this book is really about, you know, being able to understand that and understanding yourself what those things are, being able to catch it. We have something we call the 3C method for catching it, confronting it, and then changing it. And it's about changing these habits. And a lot of this is, uh, I would almost say habitual, right? That we do, that we don't even really, we're not even really cognizant of. So, yeah.
That's fascinating. It does become, right, this idea that ev essentially everybody has self-doubt.
Hmm.
I think people come to this realization at different points in their life where, you know, um, you're a kid and you just assume adults have everything figured out. And, you get to be a teenager and yeah, like, sure, maybe your parents mess up and they do stupid stuff and you're like, okay, but like they still know what's going on. And, if you like follow the like college path, you're in college and you're like, great, there's this great unknown on the other side of graduation. And when I get there, I'm going to know everything. And then you like work your way up in the world and you realize, oh, wait, like the CEO of this company, like the president of the United States still is kind of making it up
Yeah.
as they go.
There's no
And
playbook. No playbook.
yeah, yeah. And the whole playbook is there is no playbook. And like everything you're confronting is new. And I think the sooner we can realize that, the easier it is to recognize in ourselves, I'm doubting these things or I'm feeling these ways. And like, it's not wrong. I don't need to try to hide and cover it up. And there are probably some things that I believe about the world that maybe are subconscious or not, that when you address it and, confront, I can't remember the others, confront and change. I don't remember the middle one.
Catch, confront, and change. You're good.
Catch. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Skips the first step. But then you can show up in a more powerful way where you're not, reacting in ways that you're not realizing. Um, Yeah, I'm curious. I know before we hit record, you were mentioning the kind of this 5-year study that that's gone on. I'm curious to learn more about that. What has that been, and what conclusions have been drawn from that? Aside from there's lots of self doubt.
Well, it took us 5 years to write the thing, or almost longer than that. And through that was this discovery, after talking to lots of CEOs, lots of presidents of organizations, lots of athletes and teams. We talked to a lot of leaders, from sports to corporate to founders, and all those interviews and all those conversations, the self-talk was evident. And so then we started asking questions like, is this affecting your team? When you show up like this, how does your team react? And that's where that came from. It came from understanding, when we start talking to these leaders about self-talk, I mean, these are people who are, I mean, Landon Donovan, for example, like Landon Donovan's one of the most successful U.S. soccer players in history. Why does he have negative self-talk about who he is and about his skill and and why does the CEO of Kraft Heinz have negative self, like, what, so when we start talking to these people, and these people who are at the top of the food chain and at the top of their careers, super successful, and they're suffering from doubt. They're suffering from imposter syndrome. They're suffering from this "am I good enough" question. It sort of says, okay, that's fascinating, because of all the people in the world that shouldn't have any self-doubt, I would think, wow, you don't have any reason to be, have any doubt. And so that it took a long time to do those conversations and to have as many of those as we could, to find out, why, and then how do you catch it, and how do you understand it, and what do you do with it, and how do you train yourself to have a different conversation than the one you're having? Because self-talk is interesting because it's there to protect you. It's something that's probably been with us millions of years genetically, and it comes from probably protecting us from dinosaurs or big things that would eat us, in our prehistoric lives. And that talk is there to sort of get your attention and to warn you and to keep you safe. And you've got to learn how to have a different conversation, and that manifests itself in a lot of ways. But you got to learn to have a better conversation with it, and be able to have a dialogue as opposed to a one way conversation. And um, and so that's where that came from. And it just took a while to really take all those stories and take all those conversations, and put it into, and figure out where that led us to this idea that it actually does, and then talk to teams that have been impacted by it, and in our own work, and putting all that together, and making those connections. And so that's why it took so long. And what we found is that it impacts culture. It impacts profitability. It impacts productivity. It impacts the ability to be um, burnout and stress. It impacts being able to maneuver and change fast, be adaptable. And so all those things came up in those conversations, that it gets in the way of that. And so, one of the things that I think we all know is, like, a championship team. Uh, One of the things that they're able to do really fast is recover from mistakes, and they don't make a lot of mistakes on the basics, right? Um, they encourage each other. They have what we call, like, a got your back culture, not a watch your back culture. And so that's that's the book, and it's about how to create a team that has positive self-talk, and thus can really operate at a high level.
That's awesome. Um, yeah, it really comes down to, the ability for a team to be resilient and united.
That's a great succinct way to put it. Yes.
Yeah, and in at both an individual and a collective level.
Hmm.
Um, which I mean is so easy to say, so not easy to do in practice.
100%.
Um,
Not easy to do.
but yeah, but it
Concept
makes a huge difference.
concept is
Yeah.
easy, hard to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As are, usually the most important things in life. Um, no, that's awesome. Well, Rhett, thanks so much for coming on and sharing about the work you've been doing. For people who want to learn more, where's the best place to find your book when it comes out?
All the book places, it'll be in stores on October 28th. I think it'll be in the airports in December, and online, obviously, Barnes& and Noble, Amazon, all those bookstores. You can get us at headamentals.com. It's like head, mentals, it's like it sounds. But you can also go to my website. That'll take you there to retpower.com. And then you can connect with me on socials, anywhere. So I'm easy to find.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been a fun conversation.
Thank you, Jacob.